And greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. It's great seeing you all. It was a very eventful day. I had the chance to hear Dr. Robert Carter this morning speak in my geographic area. We hung out afterward to have lunch, and even David Neff was there. I was surprised to see him, and he was surprised to see me. So it's kind of interesting that some of the people that I see on YouTube I actually get to see in person, because some of them are in the geographical area. David informs me that he's at University of Maryland, Baltimore campus, and studying biochemistry and molecular biology. So congratulations to him on this undertaking. I think that's very commendable to see people studying what I consider serious science topics like biochemistry. So, and you know what? I'm sorry. You know what? I don't consider good science, Emery. So we don't need to go there. Start off on such a sour note. So, yeah, Dr. Carter and I hung out, and we had a very good conversation. We talked about a lot of things. The talks I thought were three of the best. He gave 3 talks all in a row. It was 3 hours, and the titles of the talks didn't impress me. I said, Dr. Carter, I almost didn't come. He said, well, I didn't write the titles for the talks. And I'm like, that's good, because your talks were so much better than what the titles were. And I'm glad I'm a night owl, but I got up real early in the morning to drive up to see him speak. And it was maybe almost kind of the structure of a standard creationist talk, but there's been a lot of new developments in secular peer review that he was able to present. And so I was extremely encouraged that a lot of things I felt should be in secular peer review are being reported on. And I have to congratulate both him and whoever his research team is, or collective, that are farming out and exploring all the data points, because I couldn't believe some of the journals he was finding that would report very important data points, such as, and I didn't know that there was a bird that had a fossilized bird with dinosaur parts in its stomach. Now, Emery informed me backstage that he already knew that. And so I guess because sometimes when I've heard some of the creationist chatter, sometimes I just turn it off because there's so much I can't filter out all the good from the bad. I mean, because there's so many channels now and so many people blogging, et cetera, et cetera. So I was excited to find things like this. And there were a lot of data points he shared that were very impressive. For example, he said recently that they're able to establish the cells that were being under examination for DNA in dinosaur soft tissue had been confirmed to have chromatin. This means they're not contaminations by bacteria. So that's a big deal, and that impacts my research, one of my pet projects on racemization. So this was a very eventful day. Dr. Carter will be speaking 3 times tomorrow, and unfortunately I'm tied up and I won't be able to see him. So Emery, why don't you share a little bit what's going on with you while I queue up my presentation today, and we'll dive right into it.
Sure. Mostly breaking my skull on graduate school homework. I won't tell you how many hours I put into this week's homework assignment. It would be a lot. But other than that, I do have a video that hopefully will go live Sunday or Monday or something like that, sometime in the near-ish future. But there's some very interesting projects I'm working on, which will hopefully be coming out in either creationist peer review or secular peer review, depending on the project. I've got one secular peer review paper under my own name, which obviously not going to come out under this name, but stuff is coming. I am working on projects that hopefully will be put out there and will accomplish some progress, get some progress out there. So at least that's the plan anyway. I know that was a long-winded way of saying basically nothing, but I can't give out too many details, unfortunately. So Sal looks like he's about ready to go.
Well, just about ready. Well, it's good because it's. I think it's not often that there's a YouTube channel that gets two graduate students in biology to talk who are creationists, and I feel that's a witness that needs to be made to the rest of the world. And Dr. Dan, if you're listening, you asked me to tell Dr. Carter that you're a nice guy, and I actually did that. I saw him today. I said, well, Dr. Dan asked me to tell you he's a nice guy. And I said, okay, so I did my job. Okay. All right. I just don't want to get in the middle of this because I know how it's going. But Dr. Dan, I did try to keep my word. So that's all I have to say about that. So greetings to everyone. Let me acknowledge people. There's Jungle Jargon, and there's Godzilla Freak, Mike Keller, Doki Doki, Patrick Alexander, David Neff dropped in earlier, and it's funny because I saw him live not even 12 hours ago up there in Frederick, Maryland, where Dr. Carter was giving his talk, and someone named Christian Carpenter dropped in. So greetings to you all. If I missed anyone, please forgive me. And there is Dan Straight. So I've requested, Ray Giordano's here. So I'm glad we had some opening chit chat because it gives YouTube a little time to alert people that the stream's open.
Yeah, YouTube notifications are really bad. Sometimes it takes 5 or 10 minutes to, particularly if they've got the little bell icon or whatever. So generally, I think it's a good idea to start a stream with 5 minutes of just back and forth before you get into your presentation to let people figure out that, hey, Sal's live.
So I learned what may have been causing some of the problems. I have to periodically just delete all the browser history and whatever junk or cookies or whatever.
Yeah.
That cleaned up the behavior of my computer. That may have been causing some of the Streamyard problems. That there's all these kind of gremlins just waiting out there that are associated with the cookies and the browsing history or whatever's loaded on there. And I found out the hard way because I was trying to submit a print job to Federal Express, and I'm just like, why is this behaving so bad? So I just in frustration, I said, okay, I have nothing to lose by calling their tech support. And I said, I doubt they're going to help me, but they actually did. And I got my print job done. And for those of you who are wondering what the print job was, it's sitting back there. I was going to bring that to the congregational meeting that they made online anyway. So hopefully, I'm hoping Streamyard will behave during this talk, because I was really panicking the last 2 weeks. I said, "What's going on? Will I be able to keep doing live streams with this computer? Because it's kind of been a workhorse." So I'm going to be presenting on the 70-page peer-reviewed chapter that's in a handbook. Let me show a picture of the handbook here. The handbook of mathematics of the arts and sciences. And you can see the print plus ebook is $1,499.99. And our chapter is somewhere in there. Maybe I could show it to you. Oh, by the way, you can pick it up at Walmart for $819 when they're in stock.
Sal, let's put it this way. If anything I write ever even makes that amount of money total, I think I'll be pretty happy.
Yeah. So that being said, we only wrote a chapter in there. For what it's worth, I get no money from sales of the book. So guys, I know you may love me and want to see me compensated by purchasing the book, but if you do that, you're going to make someone else rich, not me. Okay. So I just need to point that out. I mean, and Doki, I know. Oh goodness, Doki. Um, Doki, you've been a great donor to many causes of the creationists. You know, I'm directing this comment to you. Don't buy the book for my sake because I won't receive a dime. It's the publisher. So what the publisher did, they said, well, if you write it, we'll give you access to this book for free because there are lots of chapters written by other authors we don't have access to. And then we'll give you access to other handbooks that are worth $1,500. And like, I don't know that I'm going to read them, but it's nice to know I have access to like a $15,000 collection of books. Okay, so that is the publication that this is in. And so what you're already hearing is now, this is like my opening line. I'm going to probably be more succinct than in my presentation. Well, did I mention that? This tonight is a dress rehearsal, not a dress rehearsal. This is an editorial session. It's supposed to be a dress rehearsal, but I'm not quite at that stage. It's an editorial session for a presentation I'm making to Christian faculty at Christian colleges and deans. Almost all of them are in the sciences of some sort, like biology, chemistry, engineering, computer science, and so I want to do a good job. So my opening slide is just saying, okay, this is the handbook, and it might get a chuckle when I'm hoping you get a chuckle when I show the Walmart one. Okay, so this is not the Nature journal, but it is the Springer Nature publisher. So we're still very pleased to have published in this venue. The actual article we wrote, and I'll just show you part of the table of contents. You could see it right there. Dynamical Systems and Fitness Maximization in Evolutionary Biology is a 70-page chapter in this like 1,500-page book. So we do take a big piece of real estate of the book for the number of chapters that are written. And it seems like they're like 80 chapters. So we have a disproportionately large chapter, and I'm glad we were able to submit something of that size. You could probably see by some of the other titles there that a lot of things, they gave a lot of freedom of expression here. Just let me put it that way. You see something like feminist theories informing mathematical practice, and ethno-modeling is the translation of diverse cultural mathematical practices. But then we have some more of what I would expect, like fractal dimensions in architecture, measuring the characteristic complexity of buildings, Egyptian architecture and mathematics, and double layered polyhedra. There are way many more chapters than that, but I'm just trying to give you an idea, because this is, after all, trying to talk about mathematics. I mean, we kind of expect mathematics to be in the sciences, but having it in the arts, I think, is interesting. So I actually might look at some of those areas. So that's one. That's also indicating why we were given probably some more latitude in freedom in what we are writing. So how did we get invited to this venue? The way, and I've shared this before, but again, I'm just practicing how I'm going to share this in my presentation this coming week. It was because John Sanford and Bill Basener is a mathematician. They published an article in the Journal of Mathematical Biology. It set records for that journal. It's the #1 downloaded article in the journal's history by factors of like 2 or 3. And because it is a journal owned by Springer, which is partnered with Nature, I think we speculate that got on the editor's radar. And so he approached John Sanford and Bill Basener and invited the article to be written. So most of the time when articles are written, they're submitted to the editor, and then the editor decides whether to publish. In this case, the editor approached Bill and John. And then Bill approached me and said, I'd really like you to help us, because he was kind of running out of time. So I was very flattered, because I said that means he feels I have adequate mathematical ability to help. And so I was probably one of the, maybe the only one of the 4 authors that actually had the privilege of working on this full time for about 3 months. So I had to learn a lot. My job was to talk to people like Joe Felsenstein and just make sure I understood what he said and accurately represent it, things like that, digging up references. So this, what you're seeing here, is a little bit from that journal article in 2017. And a lot of it did get imported to our chapter, and that was to be expected. But we added a lot more, and even added some more math. But fundamentally, the article is about Fisher's theorem, and that's Fisher's original theorem there. That's one way to state it. It's just the change in mean fitness is equal to the variance. So the change in mean fitness at a given time is equal to the variance at that given time. The English way of saying this might be a little clumsy, but the symbols are a more accurate way to represent Fisher's theorem. And I don't know that I'm going to go in detail into the theorem, but the original theorem didn't give allowance, or didn't assume that mutations would enter the population. And so what Bill Basener did is corrected it and added mutations, corrected the theorem, and this is what the formula would look like: Fisher's theorem plus mutations. And that there's certain conditions that this will lead to genetic deterioration. So I know it looks like a mess, and it is, and I won't cover it too much, but there are about 20 pages of math like this in this paper. So I'm not going to cover the heavy math, but that's how we were able to get into a math book. So this contribution is independent of if someone is an evolutionist or someone is a creationist. This is just plain math, and therefore it's, in a sense, it's neutral. You know, we're not stating anything that should be controversial. Emery, do you have any thoughts?
No, as you well know, Sal, math and I are not friends. So the math is scary looking, but I don't necessarily understand all of it.
And by the way, let me commend Emery to the rest of the group here. We were talking about math last night, and I'm very impressed that, you know, he's studying some population genetics, and I really like his textbook. And if I ever talk to Dr. Dan and I have to reference some things, I'll say, hey, you know, that theorem's in Emery's textbook. I saw it with my own eyes. So anyway, so there's an idea of fitness in evolutionary biology. So the issue boils down to, in our paper, is what will happen to fitness as the population evolves. But then that leads to the question, what exactly do evolutionists mean when they talk about fitness? And it's in the process of going through the equations and then thinking about this is like, what is this all about? So let me show you what it means when a population is fit. The most fit individual here is the purple rabbit, this purple rabbit here, because fitness in evolutionary biology means you just make the most kids. The green rabbits only make 2 kids per parent. The reddish rabbits make only 5 kids per parent, but the purple rabbits make 10. So what does it mean when the populations becoming more fit? Well, it means that in this case, the purple rabbits occupy a larger proportion of the total population. So this population in generation 0, at this time, the population's not as fit as the population in generation 2. And that's all it means. That the greater we can say a population, this is a simplification, and I'm not going to give you the formula that's going to give the exact answer, but basically when your most fit class of individuals, or we could say allele in this case, is an increasingly larger proportion of the population, we say the population's has a higher fitness. The proper term is higher mean fitness. So you could see that over time, the population will eventually be almost all purple if we just let things rip. And so now this is a situation where the population has a very high mean fitness. Any questions here or comments, people in the chat? Blue rabbits rule. I like that one. Emery?
No, I mean, that part makes sense. That part makes sense.
And so I was looking at this. I said, this is not a big deal. I mean, to me, it says like, okay, this is what we would call a, yes, I did some of the imaging. I lifted it from our paper and cut and paste it. So I'm just like, so you have like an amoeba that makes lots more amoebas, and suddenly it's the proportion of amoebas in the population that has that prolific amoeba dominate, and that's what you call more fit. That doesn't mean, okay, this is a good question. I'm getting through. I'm going to try to answer that. Oh, you laughed. Do you have a comment?
Oh, I know. I'm just, Cheryl is getting it.
Yeah. It's like, oh, that doesn't mean the amoebas are going to turn into human beings or it's going to develop complexity. It's just saying we're making the population is occupied by individuals that make lots of babies. That's all it says. And I'm like, yeah, so all that math doesn't really solve the fundamental problem, because Darwin posed the problem and said one of them is the problem of organs of extreme complication and perfection, or something like that. Chapter 6, The Origin of Species. And he was talking about the eye. He said, how could that evolve? And just making more babies is not going to evolve necessarily an eye. And I thought about that. I said, so you have a situation where everything's just kind of like an identical twin, a clone of each other. Why is that going to evolve complexity? And I'm like, this is not good. And so what if they aren't quote unquote fit? So let's see if I have a picture of that. So let's consider, should biology be seen through the lens of evolutionary fitness? And as I was trying to point out, evolutionary fitness is defined by just making more babies. It doesn't talk about the medical condition. So let me give an example. There's this condition called sickle cell anemia. It is considered fit in an environment that has malaria. Okay, so some of the people that want to be very persnickety, they'll say, well, it's the heterozygous form. Okay, I'm just saying that fancy term just for completeness sake, but kind of the general idea is that it is a desire, quote unquote, in the evolutionary lens, is considered a desirable trait because it helps cope with malaria. If there is an environment where there's lots of malaria. So malaria will be killing off lots and lots of people, but it won't kill off people with this sickle cell trait. And I'm sorry, I should be sharing my screen. Sorry. So there's the sickle cell trait. But if that person's in North America, it's no longer a fit trait. So I'm just like, okay, so it's fit in one environment and not fit in another. It's not talking about inherent capabilities. And it kind of struck me. I said, so an evolutionary biologist would say, okay, under certain conditions, this is a very fit trait. And I'm like, something just doesn't ring right about looking at it just because it helps people reproduce and survive. And I'm going to show a book. It's called Survival of the Sickest. And this, a medical maverick discovers why we need disease. And so they're having such a hard time finding quote unquote beneficial mutations that they said, okay, well, we'll include sicknesses like sickle cell anemia, Tay-Sachs disease, high cholesterol, diabetes, obesity as beneficial traits. And it's like, and the author, Dr. Sharon Molem, said this is Darwin's genius, that he figured out survival of the fittest. And so he converted this. He said, survival of the sickest. This explains why we have so many diseases. Do you have any comments, Emery?
No, I think you're doing a great job. And I think that this is a good presentation. I do want to point out, though, 99% of the time when you hear fitness referred to in the public sphere, and probably higher than that, it's relative fitness, not absolute fitness. Remember that. It only is compared to other organisms in the population. It is not an absolute value. In other words, you have to compare it against something. It doesn't stand alone.
So this, I don't know how I found this book, but it made, I know. I was looking about longevity and sickness because there are a lot of people that are very sickly throughout their life, but I said it's strange. Some of them live very long lives, like my mother, who's sickly she had heart problems ever since she was a child, but she lived to be 95. And I just happened to be Googling that, and I found this book. And it made me laugh. I shared it with some other people. They giggled too. They said, what a ridiculous conclusion. And that's because of the definition of fitness that evolutionary biologists use. It's not the definition that common sense, the medical profession, or the engineering profession would use. So how might we define fitness or adaptation? See, we define that an airplane and a bird are fit to fly, or they're adapted to an environment where it's like the air. We can say the airplane is adapted to fly. We don't have to define it in terms of reproductive success like the evolutionary biologist. The airplane is fit to fly because it's, in simplistic terms, it's more complex than this. The lift of the airplane, which is achieved mostly by its wings, is higher than the weight of the airplane, and then it can fly upward. And we don't have to define why it's adapted to the air environment in terms of reproductive fitness. I mean, that's just a ridiculous way of describing why something is fit for an environment. They're vehicles. Let's see. So you can see there, a submarine is adapted to operate underwater. And you could see a picture of a submarine here. This is a luxury submarine. Some billionaire he wanted to build a yacht that is a submarine, okay, which is really cute. And here is a picture of a whale. Now, we could say that this submarine is not adapted to maneuver in the desert, and neither is the whale. We can describe it in terms of engineering principles of what you'd expect for a land vehicle versus a seagoing vehicle. We don't have to describe the idea of adaptiveness or fitness for an environment in terms of reproductive success like the evolutionary biologists do. And I think defining the idea of what evolutionists call fit in this way is more appropriate because it resonates with what people really think when they think about something being adapted to operate in an environment. And the reason I'm bringing this up is the more that I looked at the math, I said, the math doesn't describe anything of what we're really trying to understand about complexity or about what we would consider real adaptiveness. If you have any thoughts, Emery, and I'll just go on.
Forgot to unmute my mic. No, I would completely agree with you. The math does not tell you anything at all about the increase or decrease in complexity. The only thing the math tells you is who has more babies. And
yes.
And that is absolutely nothing to do with the increase in complexity. In fact, it's possible you could shed complexity and gain reproductive success. And I mean, I'm sure that happens. I don't have an example off the top of my head, but
Gammarus minus is a crustacean. I guess, crabs are crustaceans.
Yes.
A Gammarus minus is a crustacean, and it doesn't have eyes or functioning eyes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's reproductively successful, but it's lost complexity. There are tapeworms that have lost organs, but they're more reproductively successful. Because when they're when they're parasitizing an organism, it's like, well, we don't really need stomachs or these other digestive things, so they just dump them.
Right.
Lots of parasites. So their examples where complexity is lost. In fact, there's a paper that came out, and we cited it in our paper, that the dominant mode of evolution is loss. It's called reductive evolution.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Reductive evolution normally means bacteria, but I'm just extrapolating it to other forms, other kinds of creatures.
Yeah, there's a phenomenon that goes on in genomes called genome streamlining, where particularly parasitic organisms will basically dump stuff out of their genome that they don't need anymore because they don't, because they're not living a full lifestyle. They're just parasitizing off of whatever organism it is they're attached to. So again, that's a loss of complexity,
right?
But potentially a gain in fitness, according to
the evolutionary sense. Absolutely. Right. And I said, this is just a mess then, because people will be it's almost like they're saying, look at all this great math we developed. It's a great theory. And a lot of it is the basis of neo-Darwinism.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And yeah, by the way, Rob Carter covered neo-Darwinism today in his talks, and it doesn't solve the problem. It just pretends that it solved the problem. And they don't want to talk. They don't talk about it. That's why we now have this third way of evolution, which isn't really a third way. It just means we don't like neo-Darwinism and we don't have any better ideas. But anyway, that's my take on it anyway. But we also have like sharks that can sense electric fields. In fact, it could sense it better than anything that humans can make. I even saw that on a channel just about sharks. It wasn't a creationist channel. They said we can't build electric field sensors as good as the sharks have it. And I talked to a radar engineer, and he pointed that. He said, yeah, when I described it, it's on the sensitivities on the order of nanovolts per meter. He said, yeah, that's about the limit of physics. And I was saying, well, so then a shark is adapted to be able to sense electric fields. And I said, this is a better definition. If we're really going to talk about fitness, let's frame it in terms of the problem that we're trying to solve. It's the evolution of these complex systems. And we can describe the systems in terms of its capability. That's the better way to describe adaptiveness. I could say an airplane's fit to fly, a submarine is fit to operate under the sea, a car is fit to operate on land, et cetera, et cetera. So that being said, this is actually the conclusion of the paper toward the end. where we start citing that all that population genetics math doesn't solve the problem of complexity, which is what people think. The popular perception is that this is what it solved, and it never did. And we even cited Dawkins saying this is the central theorem of biology, Fisher's theorem, which I showed up here earlier, as if the mathematicians figured out how complexity evolves by this equation. And it's it's correct mathematically, but it's irrelevant. And we did a show on Fisher's theorem. I'm not going to cover it here today, because this is an overview. So, if the biophysicist, which is kind of one of my favorite topics, figured out what is optimal. There are criteria for deciding when a system is optimal, meaning, like, say if we're building an optical sensor like an eye, and the eye is a certain size, what's the best way to process the light and to be able to do imaging? And they figured out that for a variety of creatures, it's operating at the extreme limit of physics in terms of feasibility. Like if you have something like a fly, this is the right way to construct a camera, so to speak. And so for larger creatures, you can do different things. And so I posted William Bialek's lecture, More Perfect Than We Imagined. The biophysicists have said biology is rich with principles where so many things are operating at the extreme limit of physics possible. And many times it's so far to the limit that it does better than anything we can do with our modern technology. And they were just in awe of this, that biology is operating at these extreme limits. Optimally engineered. And I said, this is a better way of describing adaptiveness, because we can describe whether an eye is adapted to see or not in terms of geometric optics, which is a long-standing, it's one of the oldest physical disciplines, geometric optics. And we can see that in, like, when the ophthalmologist is trying to, give someone glasses. They say, okay, this is when they have these instruments. The ophthalmologist can often tell, or optometrist either, whether your eyes, the lenses in your eyes, and your whole optical system is in focus or not. And they have all these instruments, and I'm just, they'll put these machines in front of me, and they'll dial it, and they'll say, do you see better now? And is that about right? And I'll say, yeah. And I was always wondering that they could figure that out without even asking me that it was close. But they're able to use physics to determine what's optimal for what's in focus. And biology, it's like all the parts are fine-tuned to be, like in the example of the eye, in focus. And there are other things that are just optimally engineered. And I feel that was the better. So that was toward the end of the paper, but that was really the big conclusion that I personally came out with. And I said, okay, Bill, John, I know that wasn't the original intent of the paper, but this is what I discovered as I was going through the paper and the math. I said, it doesn't describe what we really would want evolution to describe. And it's the evolution of this optimal complexity. So in the public perception, when we talk about fitness maximization, we think, and even Bialek himself, who gave the lectures on biophysics, think that what's being maximized is the optimal performance of the system according to physics. And that's not what the population genetics math indicates. It's totally decoupled from physical reality. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. And I didn't quite realize it until I undertook this project and started going to the equations, and I realized it was solving a different problem than the one that people really want to solve. Any comments, and then we'll go on?
No, I would just agree with you. Like, just having played a little bit with the population genetics math over the last week, it has no functional resemblance to reality whatsoever.
As far as the problem being solved. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you're going through that exercise, as painful as it is, and spending a day on homework. We could see it has some value in saying, okay, what's the allele distribution going to be in the next few generations? That is somewhat important. Okay, that's helpful, but it doesn't solve the complexity problem. And you showed me that really cool equation. I was thinking about it today, driving up to see Dr. Carter. I said, that was really cool.
This is what you think of while you drive a car as a math equation, Sal.
Yes. I was thinking of that equation for the equilibrium of alleles under viability selection. I was just like, that's really cool. I was just like, yeah, that's what I was thinking. You know what's really scary? I'm not even that much of a math lover compared to some of my colleagues like Bill Basener.
Yes, and that terrifies me. That just legit terrifies me.
And speaking of Bill Basener, so when he published again in 2017, he got invited to the second international, he was the keynote speaker, Second International Conference on Ecology, Ecosystems and Conservation Biology. So this is indicating people recognize that even though, we're outside of the mainstream in terms of our personal views, the professional work was recognized as a contribution. And I'm glad he got the honor of being the keynote speaker. And that same year, in October, John Sanford got invited to the National Institutes of Health. And some of the formulas you see here we'll cover. I actually helped to make this slide, so we'll talk about that. So this was really just like a banner year, 2018, having the chance. And it followed, it followed on the heels of the paper in Journal of Mathematical Biology, which led to this present paper that we're talking about. So one thing that we covered in the paper, and this is where my slideshow breaks down and I'm going to have to review it, is this statement by Dan Grauer. Dan Grauer is an evolutionary biologist. He said, if ENCODE is right, then evolution is wrong. So we have discussed, Dr. Dan and I, whether ENCODE is right. And I said, well, they might be. I'm not going to go so far as to say that they're absolutely right. But it's interesting just from a hypothetical standpoint, how did Dan Grauer come up with that? And there's math behind it. And I was able to persuade the co-authors to let me insert that math. It's 1 or 2 pages into our paper. And I'll cover that because this is a very easy way to visualize genetic entropy. And so this is what Dan Grauer said. This is why he said, if ENCODE is right, then evolution is wrong. He said, studies have shown that the genome of each human newborn carries 56 to 103 point mutations that are not found in either of the 2 parental genomes. And I'm going to skip a little bit. If 80% of the genome is functional, as trumpeted by ENCODE consortium, then 45 to 82 deleterious mutations arise per generation. For the human population to maintain its current population size under these conditions, each of us should have on average 3 times 10 to the 19th to 5 times 10 to the 35th. And that's just a gigantic number with a bunch of zeros. That many children. And he said, this is clearly bonkers. This is clearly bonkers. He said, if the human genome consists mostly of junk and indifferent DNA, this absurd situation would not arise. And I conveyed that to Dr. Sanford, and he included that in his slide. And he actually used in his NIH talk, he said, this is bonkers. He was quoting Grauer. So how did Grauer come to that conclusion? And I described the math using the Poisson distribution. Just briefly, if we have a mutation rate of 1 mutation per individual, a set of parents will have some children, like roughly 39%, that have no mutation, and then the rest of the children will have like 1 mutation, 2 mutations, 3, 4, etc., according to what we call the Poisson distribution. This slide is out of order. I'm gonna have to correct that. So this is the Poisson distribution. It's in our paper. The original was in Kimura's, and I'm going to skip it except for those who want to be tortured, and I'm not going to do that in this lecture. I will be talking to a sophisticated audience, and many of them will be at least marginally familiar with that. But the point of including all this, and this came from Kimura's paper in 1966, it was landmark, like most of his paper. This is just blasting through the proof to let everyone know that I actually did try to work this all out and look through the papers. But so using the Poisson distribution, the number of defects in the genome that are added tells you how many kids that each female needs to make in order to have one kid, a good chance that only one kid has no mutations. And let me see if I have the formula here. Okay, here it is. Dr. Sanford pointed out in the average human genotype, over 100 genes are dysfunctional or altogether missing, and over 1,000 genes are substantially impaired. A newborn carries about 100 new de novo mutations originated in the germline of their parents, about 10% of which are substantially deleterious. So if we plug in 100 here, or even 10, it means the females need to, every human female needs to have 44,000 offspring to have one good kid that's clean. And the funny thing was, so Dan Grauer said, if ENCODE is right, every human female needs something on the order of 10 to the 35th power offspring. That figure with lots and lots of zeros. Every female, just to give the human race a chance of not deteriorating genetically. And that's assuming that you save the one good kid and you kill off all the rest. And he said, that's bonkers. And so the funny thing is if we use Dr. Grauer's own figures, that he thinks only 10% of the genome is functional, you only need 44,000 offspring per female.
Oh, that's not bonkers, Dr. Grauer?
I know. Yes. I tried. I had to really contain myself from laughing when Dr. Sanford was pointing that out. It's like, yeah, that as if that figure is really vindicating. And we confirmed this in other literature, like even having 3 or 4 mutations per human. We're talking like, okay, so let me just highlight this. You see, it says, oh, sorry. So if we have only, like, say, 3% of the genome, I mean, only 3 mutations per individual, every female needs to have 40 offspring. And so when you get up to 10, it's like 44,000. I'm just like, okay, they specifically point out in this paper that I'm citing that that we can't resolve, this is a paradox. How come we're still alive? And of course, the creationists will say, well, it's because humanity hasn't been around very long. We're deteriorating. But since we appeared on the scene only relatively recently, we're still alive. So this is one way of saying the genome of the human race actually ages over time, not just individuals, but each time is running out on the human race. In other words, our genes are deteriorating, and we don't know what the endpoint is. If not extinction, it's not going to be pretty. To quote one of my detractors on the internet, he said, and he's an evolutionist, and he swears that there are plenty of answers in atheism. And he said, could well be that to save the human race, we all lose our, we get dumber and dumber and all lose our minds. Okay. And like, okay, I'm glad to see at least one evolutionist admitting that that's how evolution works. And like, no, it doesn't. That's assuming evolution works at all. It's actually failing. So
I don't think said individual realized how damaging that admission is.
Yeah, he hates me quoting it now. But is that unfair of me? Because in debates, I've asked my opponents, I said, do you think the human genome is improving? I haven't heard. There's only one guy that said it, and he's not a biologist.
Spoiler for him, nobody in the professional literature thinks it's improving.
Right. I haven't found anyone that thinks our genome. These are atheist, hardened evolutionists saying that, we're at risk of deteriorating. So I just blasted through the math. I didn't try to explain it, okay? But I'm just indicating this was, we managed to get this in the paper, in the chapter, and this is from peer-reviewed literature. So this is what our contribution was. It's like, okay, we're not going to give like a free pass on anything. We feel that we've identified, it'd actually be, to me personally, okay, even if you're not a creationist, it'd be irresponsible not to point this out. Because if all the professional geneticists studying the human genome are all saying we're deteriorating, I think it's fair game to point that out. And many of them pose it as a paradox for how evolution could work. You might have to read between the lines just a little bit to see that's what they're saying. In fact, there is a paper that says, how come we haven't died 100 times over by Kondrashov, who worked at the NIH?
Mm-hmm.
And it has considerations like this. I mean, there are various ways you could approach this, okay? But I liked, maybe one way to illustrate it, I'll just illustrate it visually. See if I can do this. So now this is more and more the proof. And I might just organize this and say, okay, I can walk through this if any of you want to be tortured. But I'm just for completeness sake. And I created a table. It's a very simple formula. If you have the mutation rate, and you can call it U or mu, and you just execute that formula, that'll tell you how many offspring per female are required. And let me tell you, even when you get up to 800, a female having to bear 800 kids, a human female having to bear 800 kids, I think that's a lot. Okay.
That's not possible for most vertebrates.
Yeah. It's a lot of babies.
And not only that, you have to select away all but like one of those babies.
And so you have to assume 100% selection efficiency.
Yes.
Now they've come up with some rescue mechanisms like soft selection and synergistic epistasis, blah, 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 blah. But I'm like, you're still making even more assumptions that have not been experimentally demonstrated. I'm sorry.
And
it's a theoretical construct that you pray.
Worse even than that is you have to assume that you don't have a random event that kills the good one.
Yeah, exactly. Now I took the liberty of, and I'm sorry, I should have shown my screen here. apologies to the viewer. Sometimes I don't realize it's not on the screen. So when you see it says like Mueller 1950 here or Nachman, I'm actually citing the literature that gave mutation rates and the figures that they pointed out how many kids the female has to make. So I confirmed the formula in our paper. I showed the derivation, I've just blazed through it. But then it also concurs with what the papers themselves. So this is a confirmation that the formula was correct. And I do believe we put this in our paper. So it's like, well, what have we said here that is not in the peer-reviewed literature? But what we've done is we've put it in our paper and just, really announced it, because our audience is just math people. They're not evolutionary biologists. A lot of them are just general math, math lovers. And I said, well, it's just responsible to show that this agrees in peer-reviewed literature. And for those who love the math, they probably would like to see the derivation using the Poisson distribution, etc., as I've done. So this would be appealing to a math guy. All right. So I feel we served our readers well with stuff like this. Maybe these are facts that are a little bit embarrassing to evolutionary theory, but they're still facts that they themselves have said. And I think unfortunately, when I was typing this up, I had one. Do I still have it? Let me see if I have it. I had one picture I wanted to share. Yes, I didn't get this one in. Here's an example of a peer-reviewed paper written by an evolutionary biologist. And it's also by the Springer publisher. And the title is "What's Wrong with Evolutionary Biology?" It passed peer review, and Springer's a respectable journal. And that's why we were very glad to be published. Springer's a respectable publisher. We were very glad to be published by Springer. And I said, well, then it's fair game if an evolutionary biologist will have titles like this and actually cover things that are problematic. And I said, okay, maybe they may not like it, the creationists point this out, but if we do a good job of trying to represent the author's meaning fairly, I think there should not be any complaint. And we had lots of quotes, lots of passages, and I think we did represent the author's views accurately. And of course, my critics will say, well, they're still evolutionists. Are you trying to say that they don't believe in evolution and that this is some revelation? It's like, no, I didn't say that. They are an evolutionary biologist after all. So, I just get tired of hearing those straw men from my critics. I guess they have to do that because they don't have any real arguments at that point, and that's all they can resort to, because otherwise they wouldn't have a show or anything to say. So I wanted to show that, and we're almost done with the presentation. So, Emery, if you have any thoughts. So this is going to be a relatively short presentation.
I think you're hitting the nail on the head, Sal. I will point out, though, you showed that slide earlier in the stream. So I don't know whether you have it in there twice or you may have jumped around on the slideshow. I don't know, but double check that before you put your presentation up.
I'm going to see, this is good feedback, because now you've told me that I'm hitting the nail on the head. I need to clean up my slideshow, and I'm going to just run through the presentation privately. And it's good to see that Cheryl was seeing a few things. Mm-hmm. And so again, going back to this, okay, ladies, this is how many kids you need if you're going to save the human race. Each of you have to bear this many kids.
Yeah, how many of you ladies want to do that?
Any volunteers? Oh dear. And so this is why evolutionary biologists are really mad at ENCODE. It's like, don't tell me that. This is really bad news that there's all this complexity in biology. And so we had, I said, it's good to put the math there. So now finally, I'm just going to cover what really paved the way was this mathematical proof by Basener, which we included in the chapter, and it was in the journal, Journal of Mathematical Biology 3 years before we published this chapter. So we just cut and paste a lot of that into this chapter, which the editor was expecting, because when he reached out to our team, he specifically cited that article. He said, would you like to write a chapter that involves this article? So it really was part of the expectation. We were going to take that article, take large sections, cut and paste, and then present it to this more general audience of math. So the reason the paper got very large is we had to explain a lot of terms to mathematicians who aren't biologists. So we went through painfully, and I actually had to relearn some things, like, okay, this is what a haploid is. This is what a diploid is. Okay. And that was a good exercise for me personally. So I was tasked with writing some of that part on, haploids versus diploids. These are the three laws of Mendel. One of them is the law of dominance, and I forgot the other two. I'm sorry. And I did write the chapter on, do you know offhand what the three laws of Mendelian and Mendel's three laws are? Emery, you're muted. Oh, we may have lost Emery.
Sorry, I muted myself because I was looking something up. It's the law of dominance, law of independent assortment, and the law of segregation. I think that's the three off the top of my head. I will double check that real quick though.
Yeah, it's this is kind of embarrassing. I wrote a paper on genetics, and I don't know the three laws of Mendel off the top of my head, even though I stated it in our paper, but I've since forgotten. Yeah, I'm having lots of Joe Biden moments these days. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I just confirmed those are the three laws. Good
for you. I'm suffering from Joe Biden disease, guys. I'm sorry. My brain's going. So anyway, I'm not going to torture you guys with the math, but this is what carried the day for our paper. I mean, for their paper, and it carried the day for us getting pulled into this. And oh my goodness, look who visited. Sal, is it possible that all evolution is reductive in the sense that corrupted genetic information just so happens to be beneficial for that animals in that environment? That's almost completely accurate. There are times there is a situation, and I think I have a slide on this. And by the way, Smokey, I was watching this documentary called The Fighting Lady. It's about aircraft carriers. The hero of the story is named Smokey. He's a pilot in World War II. His name is Smokey. I thought of you. So let me see if I have an illustration. I think, okay. So adaptiveness, to Smokey's very good question. We can have survival of the fittest, but maybe the creature isn't optimally adapted to the environment. And there's a reason I'm showing the picture of this here. There are numerous papers saying we're getting dumber and dumber. And so there's one paper here, how fragile is our intellect. The losses in general intelligence due to both selection and mutation accumulation. Okay, I'll give you an example of selection decaying our intellect. I don't know if you've noticed this, but a lot of very intelligent women may not have any kids. That's been confirmed by surveys of, I don't know, whatever sort of data they had to collect to establish that. So if you have very smart people, especially women, because they influence intelligence a lot. I don't know how that actually works, of the offspring. So if you have a very smart mother, the children have a high probability of being smart too. I don't know why it tends to overweight for the female, but that's what the biologists say anyway. So if you have a lot of these very high IQ women that are very accomplished in our society that has very either zero or few kids, who ends up reproducing more? The ones that aren't as smart. And that's predicting a decline in IQ over each generation. That's in addition to mutation. Just selection alone is selecting for not as smart. So when Smokey asked about beneficial mutations, that's it's like, well, it's kind of hard to, are they adapted to their environments? Well, yeah, you could say the dumb are sort of adapted to their environment because they reproduce like rabbits compared to the super intelligent women. I know that doesn't sound polite to say, but this is, I don't know any biologist that's contesting that, and there have been papers to that effect. And so we get published papers like this one that's talking about decline in IQ. And, I expect there are lots of papers like this. So smart people don't have as many kids as not so smart people. And so we're getting dumb and dumber. So, but in the evolutionary sense, when we say the human race is getting more fit, it could be that it's getting dumber and having more kids. I'm sorry to say that. And this is why I'm showing this picture. We know this. We are concerned. We're losing our minds. Okay. We're getting dumber and we're losing our minds. Okay, so the evolutionary definition of fitness improvement is not the same as the medical, engineering, and common sense definition. So I'm sorry to say that. Yeah, the prospects of the human race are a little bit dim, and the Lord has to return at some point to redeem us. And I also talked about sickle cell anemia being considered a fit trait by evolutionary biologists, but common sense says that it is not fit. And we have this book, again, I covered it earlier, Survival of the Sickest. So let me see if I can show the problem. So here's another way I illustrated it. Hey, Emery, I'm going to just move this section of my slideshow to the front because it's easier than showing the Poisson distribution first.
Okay. Yep.
So let's say we have 20% of a population that acquires new mutations, slight birth defects in each generation. How do we clean that out? Well, we use selection, and I'll represent perfect selection with Arnold Schwarzenegger here, the Terminator, and he's going to terminate the individuals with birth defects. Okay, that's natural selection. Okay, this is kind of grim. All right, natural selection is not very polite, but Mr. Terminator says, "Hasta la vista, baby. Sayonara, muchacho." Okay, gone. Okay, a little humor here. All right. And so now we get rid of the not so, the ones with medical defects. We call it, natural eugenics. Anyway, so the survivors become parents of the next generation. And we just kind of keep that process going. But what happens if each of the individuals has some level of a birth defect? That was the condition that Grauer was referring to, where there's so many mutations, every human female has to have like a bazillion kids. So it's just as it can be approximated by this picture where every kid has a defect. What do you do then? There's no way that the genome could improve. And that is genetic entropy in sum. Because you can't wipe everyone out. That would extinct the human race. And so this is how I tried to describe it pictorially. This is why we're deteriorating. And Jesus said, Jesus said this world, I mean, Jesus and the apostles said this world is passing away and its desires, the human race. And that, as far as the humanity is concerned, our world is going to end. As human beings age and die, we have the sobering prospect that the human race on the whole, its genome is aging. We're getting dumber and dumber with each generation. There are more birth defects, there are more diseases. Autism is on the rise, not just from like environmental chemicals that are affecting kind of, children growing up. That does contribute to it, but there are also genetic components of this. And I think that's why they let a creationist like John Sanford speak at the NIH, because the NIH is they are painfully aware of the rise of birth defects. I was at a conference in 2015 for ENCODE, and one of the researchers there was an epidemiologist, and she said, "What are you doing here?" She said it more politely than that. They had a wine and cheese thing, and, we were just socializing. She said, "What brings you here?" And I didn't know how to say it well. And I said, "Well, I think our rate of mutation's higher." My boss, John Sanford, thinks the rate of mutations in the human body with each generation is so high now that it could be irreversible given our reproduction rates. And again, pictorially, if you don't have a very high mutation rate, you get a situation like this where you can just select out part of the population. But if you have a high enough mutation rate, you get a situation where it can be approximated like this, where everyone is sick, all the kids in the next generation. It's going to deteriorate. And she told me, she said, that's very interesting because she said she studies cancer. She's a cancer epidemiologist. And she said the onset of early juvenile cancer is on the rise. They can't explain it. Why are kids developing cancer now at earlier ages than other generations? So what I said resonated with her observation. And frankly, I'm hearing that from a lot of quarters. There's an epidemiologist at a hospital not too far from here, and I heard secondhand that he said, yeah, we're all deteriorating, and eventually the only things that are going to survive are the cockroaches. So I said, yeah, the cockroaches will inherit the earth. I shouldn't laugh, but sometimes things are so bad you can't help but laugh. If you have any thoughts here, and I'm almost done with my slideshow. I'm just gonna show kind of a quasi animation.
No, I think that was good, Sal. I think that was good.
I'm gonna have to put that. The cockroaches will inherit the earth. So let me just show this pictorially, the survival of the fittest. So let's say in generation, at the beginning of this hypothetical example, we have a perfectly perfect genome, but then the next generation has, so like, let's say this individual has 5 kids. And the Poisson distribution would say, okay, if you have an average mutation rate of 80 per individual, you'll have one kid that probably has 100, another that's 60. So let's say we eliminate the really bad, the kids with the most birth defects. Okay, so the first thing that happens is the parents die. Okay, so the parent actually has the best genome, but the parent dies. And let's just suppose selection works with 100% efficiency and we get rid of the worst kids. So in a sense, this is still survival of the fittest. That's why I have a picture here of Herbert Spencer, who actually coined the word, which Darwin eventually adopted in one of the later versions of his Origin of Species. So now let's say this kid grows to adulthood and has kids of his own. And we'll call that generation 1. And his kids will have more mutations than he does, according to the Poisson distribution. And, he'll die. And let's just assume the kids with the most defects die. Well, the one that remains still has a lot of birth defects, and we'll just rinse and repeat. Okay, and you can just see the numbers increasing with each generation. And I guess that's the end of my slideshow. So I'm just going to rearrange this. I think that makes the point a little easier. I'll do the Poisson distribution at the end if anyone's interested, because that kind of just clogged everything. So that's on me, and I can fix that. But that illustrates the problem of genetic entropy very simply. And that's why I'm glad my co-author said, yeah, you can include the Poisson distribution to illustrate that, because it's easier to argue genetic entropy with that. The alternative is to use Bill Basener's flagship fundamental theorem of natural selection with mutations that will also demonstrate decline in fitness. But this is like, I liken it to trying to kill a fly with a sledgehammer. Okay. I mean, it might get the job done, but it's going to be, it's a little unwieldy.
Yeah, it might do some damage to the table underneath the fly while you're at it.
But it had the benefit of, like what mathematicians do. They do like equations, and Bill delivered there. He constructed a brand new equation that was novel, that in the literature. And so that's what they wanted. So as I related the last time we talked, I had a friend who got his graduate degree in mathematics at Yale. And he was relating stories of like, well, the professor told him, there are two ways to solve this, the easy way and the hard way. I want you to solve it the hard way. So in our paper, a large portion of it was showing how fitness declines, and the proof was done the hard way. And then toward the end of the paper, I included the easy way that was worked out by someone else, not me. So that kind of explains. So there, at least we showed at least two mathematical approaches to genetic deterioration, which is a creationist friendly argument. And it's an argument evolutionary biologists themselves are having to contend with. So that in a nutshell is my perspective as second author of this. If Bill Basener were presenting, he would have a different take on things because he would focus on the fundamental theorem. So that's it, guys. And thank you for giving me a chance to do a dress rehearsal of my upcoming presentation. And this was good practice for me. And Emery, of course, thank you.
I'm glad I could be here. Glad I could help.
And before I say goodbye, Smokey, are you still there?
I haven't seen him in a few minutes in the chat. And LPP is running a live right now, so he may have jumped back over to that. I don't know.
Ah, okay. Okay. Oh, women want to be drafted now. Okay, so I don't know when I'm going to be doing another stream that's going to be like a nerd topic like this. I should have been running the banner on, let me run the banner now, on Save McLean. I have now a YouTube channel to handle some of this, and you can check that out. If you go to the SaveMcLeanBible.org, you'll see that I posted that video about the declining church attendance at McLean. So I'd like to thank people that started to subscribe to this channel because of my McLean stuff. But what we did tonight is more along the lines of what I normally cover on this channel. And I'd like to thank everyone that's joined us. So Emery, maybe I'll meet you backstage. I'm going to play our closing credits, and after the closing credits are done, we can chat. Do you have some closing thoughts, though, before I end?
I thought that the presentation was really good. It needs a little bit of refining, but that's what this was for, to find all the bugs. But yeah, I thought it was a good presentation, and I'm sure that it will be helpful and useful to the folks who will be watching it.
Well, thank you. So let me see if I can. I'm actually trying to. Okay. So I'm going to mute if we could mute ourselves, and then I'll play the end credits. And thank you everyone for joining us.